Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff live on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app is all presented by the New York Lottery. John Schmelk and Lance Meadow with you. 201-939-4513. Hashtag Giants Chat on Twitter. Giants with a really bad loss to the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday, trailing pretty much from post to post, losing the game 36-9. And Lance, just a poor performance any way you cut it. We like to sit here on Mondays and break down every minutia of the game and numbers and stats. But the bottom line is that in pretty much every facet of the game, the Giants got outplayed in this contest. And they just didn't play good football. And they got outgained by almost 200 yards. They lost the turnover battle 3 or 4-0, depending how you want to count the turnover on downs. And they just play poor football. It was their worst game of the year, and the score demonstrated that.
Yeah, they were completely out-hustled and outmanned in every phase of the game. There's no better way to describe it. I think if you're going to look at all three facets, offense, you had the inability to run the football again. In fairness, they pretty much abandoned the run in the second half because it was such a lopsided game. But still, this is the third straight game where you haven't had a balanced offense. It's been one-dimensional where it's Daniel Jones has to make plays, and they have to get the explosive plays through the air. Now, there were only 3 plays of 20 or more yards, and 2 of which came on the very last drive of the game. So that tells you an awful lot of the Giants' inability to solve the Niners' defense and, really get things to space out a little bit to open up the run game. Then you look at the defensive side of the ball, John, and after you saw an impressive performance in the second half against the Bears, and Logan Ryan spoke this week and said, well, what does he want to see out of this unit? He says, I want to see us pick up where we left off in the second half when we were deflecting passes. We were aggressive in terms of being opportunistic. Okay, well, no turnovers at all in the complete game. No takeaways, if you want to word it that way. The inability to once again get off the field on third down, John, has been an absolute killer. The Niners were 8 of 12 on third down. The Giants' opponents are converting 58% of the time on the season in just 3 games. That has to end. They did decently against the run because the numbers show that statistically, but let's not fool ourselves. Jerick McKinnon and Jeff Wilson were able to get out in open space as receivers, not necessarily runners. So I don't know how much stock or substance you put into that. And then the third thing is on special teams, they weren't really able to help out the offense or the defense in terms of the return game. The Niners did a great job in coverage. And then here's another example where penalties, I thought, John, were an absolute killer. Now, this wasn't the biggest penalty, but the Niners had issues in terms of the snap, setting up the extra points, and then Lorenzo Carter gets the face mask call. So now you give the Niners a redo, and then they're able to cash in the extra point. So right there, all 3 facets, I can easily point to 1 or 2 things on each side of the ball.
Yeah, no question about it. And the bottom line is this, Lance, and this is kind of what we talked about all offseason. When the opponent needs to throw the ball to make a play, and the Giants know it, they can't get a stop when they need it. And we've seen that repeat itself on third down throughout the year. Once again, on third downs in this game, the San Francisco 49ers finished the game an obscene 8 for 12. And it continues a pattern we've seen throughout this season from Giant opponents having a lot of success on third down. So when teams have to throw it, they can. And I think the Giants did do a good job against the run on first and second down. The Niners only averaged in this game 2.7 yards per carry. So that's good defense. But that doesn't matter if you're going to give up the third down every time.
Of course.
It just doesn't matter. Who cares? If they're in 3rd and 7, they convert. Instead of 3rd and 3 and convert, it doesn't make a difference. Nobody cares. So they have not been able to stop the pass. And what we saw in the second half, Lance, is that the 49ers in the first half, they still tried to stay committed to that run, especially on first down and early downs. In the second half to come out, they said, you know what? Why are we trying to run the ball here? I'm just going to throw it on first down. Why am I wasting my time trying to run the ball here? The Giants are doing a good job against it. And I thought the Giants' defensive line up front was good against the run, and Blake Martinez was good against the run. So why am I wasting my time running the ball on first down? They started doing those little slants off of play action and all that stuff. They used all that, pre-snap motion we saw from the Niners, a lot of play action pass, all those sorts of things that we talked about going into this game. And the Giants' defense was not able to handle it well enough. And if the Giants want to start winning football games, they're just going to have to play better. Their defense has to get off the field. They're going to have to do better against the pass. Their defensive backs, not named James Bradbury, are going to have to start making some plays. And they're going to have to start generating more consistent pressure on the quarterback. These are all the issues we talked about during the offseason. They're every single one of them. None of this come as a surprise, and they all kind of came home to roost against the 49ers in this game.
Yeah, I don't think any of this stuff is a stunning development. Also, when you look at the Niners' continuity versus the Giants' lack thereof, not to say that that's a valid excuse as to why the game was so lopsided, but what rubbed me the wrong way, at least throughout the course of the week, a lot of people were emphasizing the fantasy football aspect. Well, the Niners lost names, but the Niners didn't lose continuity. A lot of the guys that were stepping in had been on the roster, had been with the team for the last few years, may have been on the practice squad, got opportunities in 2019. Remember, this was a Niners team, John, that lost and played a number of games last season without their left tackle and their right tackle. Joe Staley and Mike McGlinchey were hurt for a good portion of last season. They lost Kyle Juszczyk. George Kittle missed games last season. They combined to miss about 150 players worth of games last year, and they still managed to have the best record in the NFC. That speaks of good coaching, good depth, and putting players in the right position. So that has to at least be noted. It's not an excuse. That's just the reality and the facts. But I want to piggyback off of a few points you just mentioned. To me, this is the biggest disparity in yesterday's game from a statistical standpoint. The Niners, you want to talk about efficiency. San Francisco had 8 possessions. The Niners scored on 7 of those 8 possessions, 4 touchdowns, 3 field goals. Their only mishap was a missed field goal. And they scored a touchdown on each of their 3 second-half possessions. They went 4 for 4 on third down on those 3 possessions. The 4 third downs in the second half were 3rd and 2, 2 third and 8s, and a 3rd and 1. So there was an example of it didn't make a difference in terms of down and distance, as you pointed out, John. The Giants had struggles no matter how you look at it. This game, I would argue, turned on a 3rd down. Because let's go to the part of the game where it's a 6-6 contest, and the Niners are faced with a 3rd and 22, and Darnay Holmes is called for an illegal contact.
Which is the right call, by the way.
100% the right call. But the bottom line is the Giants are not in a position, John, because of the injuries, because of obviously the concerns on all sides of the ball, that they can afford to give a gift like that to a Niners team and say, all right, don't worry about it. We'll give you a fresh set of downs at your own 49. We're confident enough. We're going to make enough stops, and it's not going to come back to bite us. Because from 3rd and 22 at the San Francisco 44, it goes to 1st and 10 at the San Francisco 49, and then they continue the drive. They ultimately score with a Jerick McKinnon 10-yard run. It's a 13-6 game. Then Daniel Jones is picked off. The Niners tack on another field goal. And this is, by the way, in the last minute of the first half, which, John, has also been a killer. The Steelers and the Bears, remember, scored touchdowns very late in the first half. The Niners continued that trend, and this is where games are starting to turn, because now the Giants have to play catch-up, and let's face it, this team is not built to play from behind, as we've seen over the first 3 games, regardless of the opposition.
Well, Lance, it goes back to the point I made earlier. One, that the 49ers, to your point, are very well coached and they're schemed up well. And what we've seen in past weeks, to your other point, is that when teams have to throw the ball, and the Giants know they have to throw the ball, which is what happens in these 2-minute drill situations at the end of halves, right? The Giants are not able to get the stops when they need. And at the same time, we've seen turnovers at the end of halves hurt the Giants. And I guess we should turn our attention now to the Giants offense, which just couldn't get anything going all game. The running backs in this game for the Giants, Lance, combined 10 carries for 17 yards. Daniel Jones had 5 for 49, 3 of which came on design read option plays. Well designed, by the way. Teams have been kind of crashing that weak side on the Giants' run game. That's why they had a lot of negative runs the first couple of weeks, so you make an adjustment, you make teams pay for it. Now teams have to respect the read option. That's great, but you have to do better in your traditional running game. And it got to the point where the Giants just couldn't run the ball successfully on early downs. So they decided, okay, well, we're going to have to throw the ball. The problem is that their passing game wasn't very efficient. Daniel Jones was just 17 of 32, 179 yards a pick. I thought his accuracy was a little bit off in the game. His interception was a pass thrown behind Evan Ingram. I'm not sure it could have been completed anyway, but it could have been a much more difficult play for Fred Warner on the nice play that he made cutting in front of Ingram. I thought Jones could have led him further to the outside shoulder. He didn't. He missed Ingram on a deep out later in the game. I think it was C.J. Board, right? He missed on a deep pass down the right sideline that he underthrew. It was just a rough game for Jones. He only had 56 quarterback rating in the game. You mentioned only 2 passes over 20-plus yards completed with the ball was in the air for 20 yards, and those were on that last drive when the Niners were playing their prevent defense. And just nothing was clicking for the Giants offense. They couldn't run it, Lance. They couldn't pass it consistently. And the one trend that I saw continue from the first couple of weeks, and we're going to have teams now, Lance, just copy this, and they're going to copy it and copy it and copy it, where the twists and stunts and blitzes, where you're moving defenders around, the offensive line was having a lot of trouble figuring out, which guy is supposed to block what guy and give Jones back there on those blitzes time to get rid of the ball. We saw pressure on a lot of those plays throughout the game.
I don't remember when this happened in the game, John, but I do recall, I believe it was DJ Jones. He had a free pass to Daniel Jones. Jones fortunately got rid of the football. If Jones holds on to the ball a little bit longer, he's going to be crushed on the ground, and that's going to be a sack and potentially a turnover. So there were a lot of close plays, as you just alluded to, where the Niners got a lot of pressure in his face and forced him to be uncomfortable. So certainly credit goes to the San Francisco defense. There's no doubt about it. But as you hit on, there were also mishaps and missed opportunities. This, to me, is the most mind-boggling statistic, John, from the Giants offense. They had 8 possessions in the game. 4 of those possessions ended with turnovers, because I'm including the turnover on downs as a turnover.
That's fair.
Especially, John, they took over at the 30-yard line, the Niners. That's a gift. So that, to me, is a turnover that cost the Giants big. I'm not saying that the Giants were wrong for being aggressive and trying to go for it, okay? That I don't have a problem with. But then the price you pay is great field possession to a team that had no trouble moving the football, and it came back to bite them. So 8 possessions, 3 field goals and a punt, but then 2 fumbles, an interception, and a turnover on downs. And the turnovers started early. John, this is the second straight game that the Giants turned the ball over via fumble on the very first possession. Remember, last week it was Robert Quinn on a strip sack. Daniel Jones lost the football. This week it was Jones trying to get a pitch to Evan Ingram. And listen, we could play the blame game all you want. I would argue the ball was a little bit behind Evan Ingram. I would also argue he got 2 hands on the ball and unfortunately couldn't haul it in. So once again, you want to play the blame game, you could do that. I really don't think at the end of the day it does any good. The bottom line is it was a turnover. And the Giants were fortunate, actually, if you want to look at it from this perspective. The Niners actually only scored 6 points off of the 2 legitimate turnovers early in the game, which was the interception and the fumble. The turnover on downs, I understand, led to a touchdown, but they only scored 6 points off of the 3 takeaways. So that didn't statistically maybe really hurt them, but when everything else goes wrong, we're really delving deeply into things that, in the big picture of things, don't really make a difference.
Well, and they're also lost possessions where you can't
score. Of course,
score
and
yourself.
that's the most important. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Lost at bats. Yeah,
and to your point, Lance, it was even close at halftime. It was 13-6, but then the Niners, to your point, went out there and had 3 touchdowns on their first 3 second-half possessions, and that was pretty much the end of it. And the Giants just couldn't muster on offense over the course of the game, and you can't continue to turn the ball over like they did in this game and expect to win. The Giants are now the 3rd worst team in the NFL, lo and behold, in turnover differential.
What I talk about last year.
they're at -4, and the only teams worse than them are the Eagles at -7. What's their record? Oh, 0-2-1. And the Vikings at -5. What's their record? Oh, they're 0-3.
No coincidence,
No,
John.
no coincidence. And by the way, Houston, -4, tied with the Giants. What's their record? They're 0-3. The Dallas Cowboys, -4. What's their record? They're 1-2. Go down the list, folks. This is not surprising statistics here. It happens every year. You turn the ball over and you don't take the ball away, you lose games. That's just the way the league is. And if you combine that in a game where you get outgained by almost 200 yards, that's how you lose by, 3-4 scores. That's how the math gets out to the type of game the Giants played on Sunday. And just taking a look, Lance, I looked at some of the PFF advanced stats, and these aren't official. They still have to kind of do their cross-checks on them. But just to give you an idea of some of the stuff the Giants dealt with, and then we can get to your calls at 201-939-4513. So the Giants, Daniel Jones specifically, was pressured in this game on 46% of his dropbacks, which was the 5th highest in the league. They faced the 2nd highest percentage of stunts of any other team in the league. 27% of the Giants' pass plays, the 49ers used stunts, which is the point I made a little bit earlier. And they just did not protect well enough in terms of that. So then if you look at the offense, the Giants' defense, So the Giants allowed 10 pass plays of 15 or more yards, and a lot of those were catch and runs, by the way. They weren't passes down the field.
Yeah, yak yardage.
Yeah, so that was tied for 2nd most in the league. They only applied pressure on the quarterback on 21% of the snaps, which was not a very high number. And the Giants blitzed a lot. They blitzed on 53% of their plays, which was actually ranked fairly high in the league, but they did not produce a lot of pressure off those because we talked about Nick Mullins heading into this game. He was going to get rid of the ball quick, Lance, and that's what they did. He wasn't hanging out there holding the ball. They ran a lot of play action. They had a lot of pre-snap motion. It wasn't a lot of traditional 5-step dropbacks, which is going to make it difficult for you to pressure the quarterback. And the Giants never made the Niners get off of those basic Kyle Shanahan type of plays over the course of the game, and the Niners were able to continue to move the ball.
You never got to a point where you felt Nick Mullins was uncomfortable because, first of all, the entire second half he played with a sizable lead. Okay, so that's a great gift for a quarterback. They didn't run the ball and pound it down the Giants' throats, but they were at least able to stick to it. The one other stat that I'll add on, and this is not a PFF stat, it's not overly complicated. John, Nick Mullins, 36 pass attempts, 35 runs. Is that not what every team strives for, right? I mean, think about the balance. You're ideal when you are running the ball as much as you're throwing the ball. Then you look at the Giants. Daniel Jones, 32 pass attempts. They ran the ball 15 times. Why? Because they were playing catch-up. I mean, that to me also goes hand in hand. The other thing that I wanted to throw in here in terms of also allowing the Niners to be comfortable, and it somewhat stems off of the stats that you were talking about, John, it wasn't just the Darnay Holmes penalty to me. I would argue, even though the Giants had only 5 penalties, and I brought this up more often than not last season, the Giants were not a high penalized team last season. But what you could argue, John, is the penalties always came at the worst possible time, that even though there wasn't a big volume, they were so costly. So outside of the Darnay Holmes penalty, you had Leonard Williams offside, and you had Dalvin Tomlinson encroachment. Both of those penalties came on 2nd and 5s that resulted in automatic first downs. Okay, so now once again, more gifts to the opposition. Then you had Darius Slayton was called for holding, which was part of 2 offsetting penalties because Jaquiski Tart was called for a face mask. That came on a Daniel Jones 16-yard run. You wipe that completely out in order to move the chains because of, once again, a penalty. Now, the other one was Andrew Thomas' false start. Okay, that wasn't a killer, and that was towards the end of the game. But 4 of the 5 penalties, John, you could argue, took away a first down, rewarded a first down, and the real hammer was obviously the 3rd and 22. So not a high volume, but all at the worst possible time.